library, and we're going to talk about your source journal in a couple of different parts. And so this is the first video that I'm going to post, and so you want to watch these in order. And so go ahead and start with this one, and then follow up with the numbered videos because they sort of work with each other. So the first thing I wanted to do is just go over what we're doing with the source journal again. So you're not totally working on the source journal yet. One of the things you're going to do this week is you're going to work on finding your academic source for a mock source journal entry, which we're going to talk about on Thursday. And so basically the same idea is going to apply to when you're actually working on your specific project. Okay, so a source journal, like we went over with the major project prompt, is basically it's a list of your course text that describes, with each of those texts, how you're going to use the source, what your main ideas and arguments are for your source, and basically what you sort of see the intertextual connection being between this source and all of your other sources. So you're going to try and find all of your source texts between now and the time that the source journals do. And remember, these are probably going to change as you're actually researching, because we're using questions, we're using our lines of inquiry to actually bring us to what's eventually going to be an argument. But what we have to do before we know what kind of argument we're going to make is we have to find all of the sources that are going to make up that argument. So this is just a guideline. Remember, we don't actually sort of need to use all outside sources for this this research sequence. You can use 2 to 3 of the course texts, and then I am asking you to at least use 2 outside sources. So you need no more than 2 outside sources, and 2 of those sources need to be academic secondary texts. Okay, so this is something like an academic book chapter, an introduction to an edited or scholarly collection, something like Jesmyn Ward's Introduction to the Fire This Time, book reviews from an academic journal, right? Academic journal articles, scholarly blogs, things like that. And so you need at least 2 sources to be academic secondary texts. One of the texts that would count from our course text would be like the chapter from Anthony Oliver Smith's edited collection, or the chapter that Dyson wrote, yeah? Would count as an academic source. So I just want to go over in this first video, I just want to go over what the difference is between a primary and a secondary text. And so I'll post these notes on our Canvas page, but a primary text is the first thing I want to go over. And these are often the objects of our analysis. So say that we're writing a major project about gender and Salvage the Bones. The object for our analysis, the primary text, would probably be Salvage the Bones, right? It's the sort of text that we're analyzing as our primary source. And so often it would be, like for your first paper, it was analyzing a song, right? And so you used Kendrick Lamar's All Right as the primary text for your first paper. So like the discussion board that we did on the I Am Not Your Negro, the Raoul Peck film, that's a primary text, right? If we'd read an article that was criticizing the film, like we read that Atlantic article that was sort of the review of the film, right, the critique, that would be a secondary text, okay? And so the difference in a primary text and a secondary text is basically the tool that you're using to analyze the primary text. Okay, so let's say that, for example, you had your primary text is I Am Not Your Negro. A secondary text might be that Atlantic review of the film. So it's a text that helps you make commentary or critique a primary text. It's talking explicitly about something outside of itself, right? And so academic articles, book reviews, film reviews, these are all secondary texts because it's a text that you're going to use to make analysis about a primary text on, okay? And so then the follow-up question is, how do we know whether an academic text is primary or secondary? Okay, so how do we know whether it's primary or secondary? A lot of what we have to look for first, or we want to look and see if there are citations in like an academic article, right? If the citations refer to a text other than just what other than itself, it's a secondary source. So like, for example, Anthony Oliver Smith's book chapter on the multidimensionality of disaster, it referred to outside research, right? He was using other sources to create his argument. And so we can look to see that those citations make it an academic text, right? He's citing other scholarly sources, yeah? Yeah, so we can think of, I've got a couple of examples here. So something like Achebe's The Truth of Fiction, it's actually a primary text, right? Achebe's presenting his own ideas. He's not analyzing the ideas of others. He's not talking about texts written by other people. He's analyzing, he's presenting his own ideas in that. So it's a primary text, right? The Glass essay, right? The Sample Major Project, that's a secondary text, right? She analyzes other sources. She forms a thesis based on the primary sources. The Atlantic critique, right, of I Am Not Your Negro, it's a secondary text. And here's what's important to remember about something like the Atlantic critique. We have to look to where it's published to find out if it's an academic text or not, right? The Atlantic isn't an academic journal. It doesn't have peer review. It's a popular journal, okay? So if we're thinking about what makes a scholarly or an academic source, we're going to want to look for one major sort of thing: peer-reviewed. A scholarly text or an academic source is peer-reviewed. And what that means is that it's reviewed by people who have knowledge on the same topic in the field. It's vetted by people, it's tested by people who work in that same discipline professionally. So, for example, the Anthony Oliver Smith essay had to be peer-reviewed before it could be published in this edited collection, right? It's published by an academic press, right? It's published by a university press. And that's the easiest way to see if we've got an academic source on our hands, is look at, we want to look at where the text was published. Is it a university press? If so, it's academic, right? And often here, also it means peer-reviewed, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is if it's from a university press, it's also peer-reviewed. And the reason that you want to use peer-reviewed academic texts in your research is because it strengthens your claim, right? Those texts are sort of, they come as sort of representative of the way that a field is thinking about a particular issue, right? And so if we're going to get into an intertextual conversation about a certain topic, we want to look to experts in the field and what are the experts in that discipline already talking about. The knowledge itself has a particular type of value, right? It's not just some guy sitting in his basement and writing whatever he wants, right? It has to be circulated to other experts, and it's sort of like the first check has already been done, right? So those are the first things I want you guys to think about, right? The difference in a primary text versus a secondary text, and looking back to the major paper or the major project prompt and seeing, you know, I need, okay, at least 2 sources that are academic scholarly texts, right? So that can be from our readings, it could be from the outside sources as well. So at least 2 need to be these academic, peer-reviewed, scholarly texts. Okay. So go ahead and go to the next video to start looking at the database.